In 2019, renting a ship to carry cars across the ocean cost around $16,000 a day. By the end of 2023, that same ship cost $115,000. Nothing about the vessel had changed. Same steel, same engine, same crew, same route. The only thing that changed was that China had started building far more cars than the world had boats to move, and the people who owned those boats worked out exactly what that was worth. Most car makers paid up. Some quietly cut their export targets. A few sat on the dock and waited for space that never came. One company did something nobody expected. It stopped renting. It went to a shipyard, wrote a check, and started building its own ships. Then another. Then 6 more. Within just 2 years, BYD wasn't simply exporting cars anymore. It had started building its own way to reach the world. Inside 2 years, BYD had assembled a private fleet large enough to reach Rotterdam, Barcelona, Brazil, and Sydney, without asking a single shipping line for permission. The car press barely noticed. They were busy arguing about blade batteries. That was the mistake, because the ships were never the real story. Start with the names. Explorer number 1, Hefei, Changzhou, Shenzhen, Xi'an, Changsha, Zhengzhou, Jinan. At first, they look like 8 individual ships. They aren't. 8 vessels assembled in less than 2 years, with the final ship entering service in September 2025 and pushing the fleet's reported annual capacity beyond 1 million vehicles. That's already unusual, but the ships themselves aren't the interesting part. It's where they begin. Xiaomo International Logistics Port, Shenzhen's Shenshan Special Cooperation Zone. BYD's factory sits roughly 4 kilometers from the port. Vehicles leave the production line, reach the port gate in about 5 minutes, and roll onto a vessel. Factory door to port gate in roughly 5 minutes. Then the port connects into something much larger. By September 2025, Xiaomo's Ro-Ro network covered 11 international automotive routes across 7 regions: Southeast Asia, the Middle East, the Mediterranean, Europe, South America, Australia, and Africa. 1 port, 7 regions, 11 routes. Now zoom out. The ship is the middle of the journey. Before it, factory, then port. After it, another port thousands of kilometers away. Then the local market. What looked like a car company buying vessels is starting to look like a connected system for moving finished cars around the planet. And this is where something shifts. You started this story thinking about 8 ships. Now you're looking at a network. Those aren't the same thing. The ships were only the visible part. The network was the breakthrough. But why would BYD spend billions building something nobody else wanted to own? Because the old system suddenly became a problem. Chinese vehicle exports exploded, while the global car carrier fleet couldn't keep up. By the end of 2023, Clarkson's research put the 1-year charter rate for a roughly 6,500 CEU car carrier at a record $115,000 a day. But that isn't what frightened manufacturers. Expensive shipping is painful, but that's still not the real problem. Unavailable shipping is something different. Imagine a BYD factory running exactly on schedule, orders confirmed overseas, dealerships ready to receive vehicles, and no vessel available. You can build another factory. You can build another battery plant. You cannot make a car carrier appear next Tuesday. That's not just a logistics inconvenience. For a manufacturer expanding overseas, a missing vessel can become a delivery problem very quickly. Cars can be finished, orders can be confirmed, and dealerships can be ready. But without transportation capacity, the product still isn't where the customer needs it. Suddenly, the factory wasn't the bottleneck anymore. BYD was expanding internationally at exactly the moment transportation capacity had become scarce. The bottleneck wasn't some distant industry problem. It was sitting directly between the factory and the customer. And as exports grew, that bottleneck became harder to ignore. So the calculation changed. Less dependence on somebody else's capacity, More control over when its own cars move, not complete ownership of every port or every route. Something more practical than that. This wasn't really about ships anymore. It was about control. But even owning the ships didn't solve the biggest problem. Here is the problem nobody sees when a BYD ship leaves China loaded with thousands of cars. Owning ships solves one problem. It creates another. The money is made most efficiently when the ship is carrying a valuable cargo. What comes next is harder. The ship still has to move. And the danger is what happens when there isn't another profitable cargo waiting at the other end, while fuel, crew, insurance, and port costs keep running regardless. Shipping companies solved this decades ago. Have an advantage here. They can combine different manufacturers and cargoes across much larger networks, filling return journeys in ways that a manufacturer focused primarily on its own products cannot easily replicate. You gain control on the outbound journey. You inherit the utilization problem shipping specialists spent decades solving. This is the part almost nobody talks about. Outbound, the fleet looks brilliant. Coming back, it becomes expensive. And for a company still building its international footprint, that economic tension matters every single voyage. Then something shifts. In June 2025, BYD established Shanwei BYD Industry. Freight forwarding, warehousing, stevedoring, container shipping, and NVOCC services. The move added something the ships alone couldn't provide: an organizational layer around freight, warehousing, and forwarding. And if those capabilities eventually connect with cargo, warehouses, ports, and ships together, BYD would have another layer of the logistics chain it could potentially influence. The ships weren't the difficult part. Making the network work was. And that's exactly where the story becomes much bigger than 8 ships. You thought BYD was building ships. It was really building infrastructure. Or were the ships only the visible part of a much larger plan? Look beyond the ships. Brazil. BYD began assembling vehicles at its Camaçari factory in 2025, and a car assembled in Brazil doesn't need the same finished vehicle ocean journey to reach a Brazilian customer. Hungary. BYD's Szeged plant, expected to begin production later in 2026, putting manufacturing closer to European customers. Thailand, another overseas production base already running. BYD is changing where the transportation problem begins and ends. Now put that beside Xiaomo. Factory 4 kilometers from port. Port connected to 11 international routes across 7 global regions, and overseas factories starting to change where those ships are even needed. By now, the ship is starting to look less like the strategy and more like one connection inside something much larger. This is where copying BYD becomes much harder than ordering ships. China delivered 53.69 million deadweight tons of new shipping in 2025, 56.1% of the global total, while taking 69% of new orders. That industrial base exists before BYD even enters a shipyard. Add China's vehicle production clusters and export ports, and the advantage becomes less about owning steel and more about connecting steel, cars, and markets at a scale that takes decades to build. The ships were never the system. They were only one piece of it. But one question still remained. Why can't everyone else simply do the same? Because BYD isn't the only one testing this idea. SAIC's Anji Logistics already operates a major dedicated vehicle carrier fleet. In May 2025, it added a 9,500 vehicle vessel for European expansion, explicitly describing the move as a way to ease export shipping constraints and support the international growth of Chinese brands. It's becoming the future of manufacturing. For decades, the logic was simple. Make the product, pay somebody else to move it. But if transportation becomes scarce, expensive, or politically exposed, the calculation changes. Control the factory. Control the port connection. Secure the shipping capacity. Build closer to the customer. Change the route when the world changes. Logistics stopped looking like a service a manufacturer buys. It started looking like part of the manufacturing system itself. The biggest breakthrough may never be another ship. It may be the moment manufacturers stop asking someone else for space and start owning the route instead.